Throughout my life playing games, I've always been interested in cards. They are such a mainstay of gaming, and some historians believe that playing cards like the modern deck goes back as far as the 13th century. Things have changed a lot since then, and it's now very easy to create your own bespoke deck. It's very easy to make a card, but I contend it's very difficult to make a good card. I wanted to understand more about what makes a good card easy to understand, and maybe create a few guidelines as I go. So I started by taking a look at some of today's popular card designs. So let's look at some cards. Here we have a few examples from a standard French deck of cards. They are the gold standard in card design. They have the index in the corner, very clear symbols and colours. The pips count out the value for the card, and there is a simple and unique design for each face card. The card tells you in at least 3 different ways what its value is. You can also clearly tell what the card is no matter its orientation. Uno cards are similar in many ways. They have the index, they have a very clear colour, and the symbols used for the non-numerical cards are easy to understand, which probably contributes to why they're such a popular family card game. Moving to the other end of the spectrum, these are cards from the Dragon Ball Z trading card game. The shiny ones are really shiny. The gold foil on this one makes it quite hard to read. They are also really packed with information in text, symbols, and numbers. Even this plain card is difficult to read. So what does this mean in-game? The simplicity of playing cards allows players to make many games using the same deck. It also allows you to play simple games very quickly, like Snap. The speed at which a player can interpret the card helps a game move more quickly. Many common modern cards are more complex and only work in the one game. This scene is a common one. Play is going along smoothly, but then a card is played which brings the game to a halt while a player reads it. You might argue that the players should already know what the card does, but there are over 23,000 Magic the Gathering cards, so that's a bit of an ask. If the card isn't clear, or could be read in multiple ways, the players might even argue about it. So what models already exist to help us analyze cards? Firstly, let's talk about accessibility. Accessibility deals with how easy it is for a text to be read and focuses on catering to people with impaired vision. Accessibility discusses text spacing, text size, the fonts that are used, and many other factors which change how easy it is for a text to be read. WCAG and Vision Australia provide comprehensive guidance on how to make a text more accessible. Recent works focus on digital text, but these principles should absolutely be applied to cards as well. Another important factor is readability. This is the concept which deals with vocabulary and the complexity of writing. This is a fairly well-studied area, and it's very important for getting your writing at the correct level for your audience. For example, the Flash-Kincaid grade level formula is a staple of readability. It uses the average sentence length and the average syllables per word plus a few coefficients to estimate the number of years of education you would need to understand the text. In theory, we could use something like this to assess a card's readability. It's quite good for things like essays and books, but not so useful for just a few words. And it has no way to deal with symbols, it can't really assess art, and numbers just aren't considered. Nonetheless, this is a good place to start, and a good point of reference for cards. To build on accessibility and readability, I propose a new concept called interpretability. Interpretability describes how easy it is to read a card, then understand that card, and then further put it into context within the game. To be useful, interpretability should work for all cards and for all the different ways cards are used. A major factor for interpretability is information density. By this I mean how much information there is on a card. The information on a card can be broken down into 3 broad categories. Firstly, we have rules. This is information that does something and causes a change to the game state all by itself. Squirtle's attack has a text which calls for the player to do something extra. Next are values. This information is used by the game in its normal course. The value on this Charmander card includes its HP, attack points, and a few other things. And lastly, there's secondary information. This has no functional effect on the game state, but it might look good or contain fun information. Bulbasaur's art, rarity, and character stats are secondary information. Breaking the information down like this can assist in understanding how hard a card might be to interpret. For example, an 8 of hearts has just 3 values. It's red, it's hearts, and it's an 8. Uno cards are even less dense, having just values for colours and numbers. A Magic the Gathering land card has only 2 values, colour and land, but has lots of secondary information. And this Magic creature card has quite a few bits of information from all categories. It takes a moment to interpret, doesn't it? So information density is a major factor for a card's interpretability, but it's not the only one. It's also important to consider how a card is used within the game. If a card is placed, where is it placed? How far away from the players will it be? If a card is shown, how long will it be visible for? Do you expect players to remember it? If a card is held, who is supposed to be able to see it? These factors must be taken into account when designing a card to maximize interpretability. Another thing to consider is how many card formats you have and whether they're instantly discernible. As an example of where this hurts interpretability, Magic the Gathering has many different types of cards. Here are 2 lands, a creature, and a spell. They all basically look the same, even their backs are the same. There are differences, but they're not easy to spot. When these cards are drawn from the deck, it takes a moment just to understand what it is.
Next are some examples from the board game Wingspan. There are 4 decks in this game, each with their own card type. They're all distinct in that their faces are fairly different, but they do share colours and features. They have different backs, but even still, across the table, I'm not sure I could tell which was which. Lastly, here are some cards from the board game Smiths of Winterforge. These are very visually distinct cards in colour, size, and backs. It's very clear what each of these are at a distance. When designing cards, it's important to consider if one card can be confused for another.
So to summarise, cards are really versatile game components, but they do have their limits. It's important to consider established guidelines around readability and accessibility when designing cards, but there's even more to consider. Interpretability is a new concept to consider how the information, format, and usage of a card might affect the play of your game. That's not to say that a card with low interpretability must be bad, just that the designer should consider how that works in the context of the game. More work should be done on this topic, with the aim of developing a formula which gives a numeric gauge about how interpretable a card is and how audiences might react to it. This could then be used by designers to help them make better cards. Thanks for listening and keep on shuffling.